Keri Jarrell's debut collection, After the Revival, was the 2008 winner of the Anthony Hecht Poetry Prize through Waywiser Press. She's also a 3-time nominee for the Pushcart Prize anthology and is currently an assistant professor at Murray State University. After the Revival is a stunning book of poems that romps its way through the gravel roads and demolition derbies of the American South and Midwest. If you paid any attention to this week's selection, these are our red states. In these pages, we wrestle with the ruins of these landscapes, the strip mines and cemeteries, those counties thick with copperheads. We feel the struggle of its people, a 12-year-old tweaked on her mother's meth, or a jilted lover on a long stretch of highway. But these poems do more than dwell on such ruin. From this landscape still comes a beautiful sense of longing, a desire to be at last reborn. Like all good gospel, and for that matter country songs, it's the hardship and pain of life, the boot heel of God on your throat that makes us feel like singing. Time and again, this collection returns to the song's awesome power, the redemption and revival a well-sung tune can offer. This collection is filled with songs that are real, not, as Jerrell writes in her opening poem, the size 2 pop stars manufactured vibrato, but the kind that's all curves, that's 2 parts sex and 1 part scripture. Enjoy the afternoon revival and help me in welcoming Keri Jarrell.
Thanks very much, Britton, for that introduction, and for inviting me, and for this earlier class for hosting me, and for all of you for coming out. This is a great space in your library, and what a great spot, the library, to have a reading in. I'm really thankful to be here, and I think what I'm going to do is spend about half of the reading on poems from the book, and then maybe half or a little less on some new poems. That probably won't stand there. Let me get all figured out here. Okay. So I don't think I have to tell you a whole lot about the book now because Britton's done such a lovely job of it. But it is called After the Revival, and I grew up in a really religious household, and we went to a lot of revivals, and I was always interested in them. They're fascinating social experiences, even if you aren't religious, and so I liked going to them. And as I grew older and I sort of moved away from the church and then came back to the church and then went to other churches and then moved away from the church, and I kept going back to revivals. I like to go to revivals. But what interests me so much about a revival is what happens after it. You know, it's supposed to be like this rebirth, but why do we feel like we need to keep going back? So that was one of the themes that I wanted to explore in the book. And the book's divided into 3 sections, and the first section deals with like poems about my hometown, and which I grew up in southern Indiana, and lots of heartbreak poems and a lot of music poems because I was raised in a very musical household. My dad used to sing in one of those southern gospel quartets. So he would drive, they were called the Challengers, and he would drive around the country in their bus, and they would do all these crazy things and sing at all these places. One time they sang at the same Southern Gospel conference as Elvis before he became really popular. And their other big claim to fame is that, I don't even remember his name, but you know the Oak Ridge Boys, the classic country band? Okay, the guy with the band member with the really long hair. I believe it was him that they recorded an album in his basement. So that was their claim to fame. They've been in the Oak Ridge Boys' basement. So the opening poem, which Britton quoted from, is titled "The Poet Prays to Her Radio for a Country Song." And I lived in Texas, West Texas, for a while, and I would have to drive from West Texas to Indiana for Christmas or things like that. And when you do that, you have to go through Oklahoma. And Oklahoma is kind of barren, and there was lots of spots where there was no radio. And so during one of those spots where there was no radio, I came up with the idea for this poem. So the poet prays to her radio for a country song. O guardian of the well-lunged, purveyor of lies, enabler of the backseat horny, I am sorely afflicted. Traveling the long tongue of Highway 40, I fear the bottomless black sky of loneliness has hawked me from the back of its throat and doomed me to land, wet and without notice, in the dust-bitten spittoon of Oklahoma. Have mercy, and do not leave me in my despair to the size tube pop star's manufactured vibrato, or my own heavy static. I confess I drive a foreign make. I refuse to use home color on my hair. And once again, I've let heartbreak put his hands in my back pockets. How I need a song tonight, the kind that's all curves, that's 2 parts sex and 1 part scripture, that wears work boots to wardrobe on opening night, and when handed pink chiffon says, baby, you know I don't do delicate. Descend, you blue-jeaned honky-tonk angels, and play my pain in 4/4 time on fiddle and red bird's eye apron steel guitar. Let my voice be open as a screen door, all latchless and breeze blown, all invitation. May it reach like a revival choir, my man standing by the entrance, and may he tug at his collar from the heat. Minor spirit, I have been blinded by love's late night hallelujahs, but I hear the blue notes coming. I've had enough measures of introduction. Let me testify. So I started writing these poems that were kind of like prayers. And I noticed as I was writing them that the objects to which I was writing became more and more dangerous. And so this is the last one that I wrote, and then I thought maybe I should stop those for a while. So this is the poet prays to the 9mm under the driver's seat. Coldest friend, pretty little monster, I know relief lies low and left of center. I'm looking for it now. The windshield shines with my body's outline on its field of nighttime glass, of stars on glass, though I'm no star, just a waning mark at which to aim my crooked sights. My days are all dry fires, and better actions call for calibers higher than my own. Be savior to my lovesick bones, groom to the primed bride of my loneliness, and I'll forever be your best brief muse, your straightest shooter. You have a way with wounds, with damage and deliverance, and I make a ready berm for both. Let your triggers break, perform my lullaby. I'll hold the final note. Bury it here, in the hollow of my throat. So I grew up in southern Indiana, and there was a lot of strip mining going on. There's not as much anymore. And my grandfather lived in this area outside of town on a hill that was called Bell's Hill. And he worked off and on for the mine for decades. And before he died, the mine bought all of his land, and they raised the house where we had spent a lot of our time as kids growing up. And they blew it up, and they got all the coal out, and then they tried to sort of reconstitute it like they do. And so my brother and I would often go back there. Now it's like a giant lake. And my brother and I would often go back there, and my sister too. And we would try to reimagine, what it was like when we were kids. And of course it gets harder and harder to do that the older you get, because your memory begins to fail you. So, so one evening while I was up there, I started thinking about perhaps writing a poem about it. So this is a poem titled View of Petersburg, which was the town next to it, from Bells Hill Strip Mine, Pike County, Indiana. They've raised the gospel center where I crossed my heart in water, died and rose again. There's been no county fair, no pageant queen to take my crown and ride down all 5 blocks of Main Street on the 4th in someone else's 67 Mustang, hot pink Dollar General lipstick and a sequin dress too short and rented out of town. The mines are all shut down, land butchered like a cow. At dusk, a thick mist settles on Bell's Hill and summer sings, O land of rest for thee I sigh, on sluggish D-flat minor winds. This is where we'll bury it. River down, crops withered, last good beef from winter eaten. We'll lay one building at a time across the bottom, shine empty storefront glass, repoint the courthouse brick, and pray for 40 days of flooding rains until its streetlights glow beneath the water like a second-rate Atlantis, like the stars in dead reflection off my eyes. You'll come like a witness then when the rest have left, and park top down with your love for fireworks bursting from some distant place. I'll be here, whispering tall tales to boys from out of state who put their hands where my heart should be, beneath my first place sash, my skin still coal ash soft, legs tan and warm around them, still strong enough to swim this pit and live. So, I grew up with a lot of country music, and you can't listen to much country music, especially classic country, without listening to a lot of Willie Nelson. And I sort of have a love-hate relationship with Willie Nelson. And so I was thinking about it. I was thinking about Willie Nelson, and I was at the same time reading some poems by an Arkansas poet by the name of Jim Whitehead. And he has these great poems, sonnets, that are written in the voice of a country western singer. The country western singer throws his bass player off the bus. That's one of them. The country music star begins his politics. That's another one. And so there were all these voices, all these poems written in the voice of this particular character. And I decided that I wanted to write a poem written in the voice of that country western singer's ex-wife. And so I decided to do that. And his were all sonnets, so I figured I needed a form. So I decided to use a sestina, which is a longer form, and it has lots of repetition in it, because I figured she would probably have a whole lot to say. And you're supposed to repeat certain words in each stanza in a sestina. And so one of those repeating lines became titles of Willie Nelson songs. So it all kind of conflated together into this one rapturous experience of writing. So this is the country western singer's ex-wife, sober in Mendocino County, California. Somewhere back east, my late love's all coked up, another cowgirl wannabe lying at his feet while he plucks a Willie Nelson song from his beer-soaked six-string and complain nobody understands a rebel's broken heart. I've played her part, starstruck blonde in boots and denim mini, boobs and brains to boot. Whiskey-fed, dreamy, how I talked him up. A sequin Tammy to his George, my heart a backstage bed I wanted him to lie in. It proved too hard, and when a harder body came along, he said the party's over, and left me listening to sad songs and waltzes, wailin', steel guitars that struck like a boot to the face. But that's good country, right? A body enamored with its bruises, praising its screw-ups, the blood still wet in its wounds. Memory lies as still as a rattlesnake until my heart begs for its venom. Sink 'em in, my heart says. I've been traveling on a horse called music, and he's brought me here to die. I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to fill my ex's boots with spit the night I caught him with that upstart starlet at the bar when everybody tried to hide in their shot glasses. when nobody but a Broadway street preacher had the heart to hold my hair off my face while I threw up outside. When all the songs I loved, Crazy, Golden Ring, Jolene, became like boots too busted to put on, bent pitch ballads of his lies, my shame sung loud in the key of C. He's lying from the stage, in the bar or bed, when he says nobody understands him. I do. I've burned my boots, moved west to wine and water, because his heart was a dry bottle, cold as the black rose rotting in his lapel, and I still wake up to his tunes. The beer, blow, boots, and love, the lies they tell and don't. Once, I was a good-hearted woman. Now I pray, Lord, please, somebody shut him up. So, I decided when I was in the middle of writing the book, that I needed to write a love poem that was not about heartbreak. And they're very hard to write. They're very hard to write and not make totally schmaltzy. So, so I tricked myself by telling myself that I was actually going to write a poem about farms and farm equipment and land. And somehow it worked. And I don't know how many of you write, but often when I write, I have to trick myself. I have to sort of tell myself I'm going to do something else besides the thing that I actually want to do, so that I don't think about it too much. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But for this one, it did. And the poem is called Plain Song. And I don't think there are any terms in here that you need to have defined for you. I have gone to other places. I did a reading in Los Angeles once, and nobody knew any of these terms whatsoever, so the poem wasn't a very good success when I read it. But I think you guys will get it. So this is called Plain Song. If you saw my footprints around the barn loft's ladder, you would know I tie each bale with sisal twine and secrets. If you saw me kneel among cut sweet corn stalks, you would know I hear vespers in the auger's rush. If red tails scouted the warren's edge, where murders call from their barbed wire roosts, you would hide me in a row of ruby snapdragons, mend my briar-lashed hands. Like the Dobbin, you would carry me where jack-in-the-pulpits grow, beneath cathedraline white oak and hickory. If sunset turned ripe wheat fields honey gold, and the combine hummed as it cleared the 100th acre, if, after dark, haze hung like a new heaven above the furrows, you would know the harvest moon is near, that sheets left on the line will smell of blazing stars in the morning, and that I wait upstairs for you, barefoot on the pine floor, unplaiting the amber linens of my hair. So the second section of the book is a series of sonnets, and the sonnets are all about weddings. And they started sort of as a joke. They started because I had one of those summers, which many of you may have had, where you have to go to a whole bunch of weddings, and you have to buy a whole bunch of gifts for people that you only kind of know. And so I started to sort of write as a way to, I don't know, be snarky about having to do that. And then they became more serious, and the sequence became more serious, and I kept writing more of them until I ended up with 20 of them. So the way that they function is the title is some element of a wedding. So the processional, the ring, the dress, the cake, whatever. And then I write about that for a little bit. And then usually at the turn in the poem, about halfway through the poem, things start to come unraveled in one way or another. So they're not the kind of poems that you actually want to read at someone's wedding, except maybe the last one. But if you like to poke fun at things, especially weddings, then these are the sorts of poems for you. So this is the audience participation portion of the reading. So what sorts of things do you want to see if I have a poem about when it comes to weddings? The mother-in-law. I don't have a well, I have a mention of a mother-in-law. How about the father of the bride? Can we do that one? Okay, all right. So this is the father of the bride. And how many of you have seen, there's the Elizabeth Taylor movie, The Father of the Bride, and there's also Steve Martin movie, okay, where at some point he's sort of had enough, and he's paying, of course, out the wazoo for all of these things, and he goes to the grocery store and he has a complete meltdown over hot dog buns, because he doesn't need all the hot dog buns in the package. He only needs a certain number of them, and he doesn't understand why he has to pay for all of them in the package. So that figures into the poem. Okay. So the father of the bride. When the tailor's club hand hovers near the crotch of a penguin suit worth more than your last Winchester, you remember from that film your wife made you watch a line, Armani don't make polyester. Now, George Banks's meltdown in the grocery store over 4 superfluous hot dog buns, they're not ripping off this nitwit anymore, is a scene you understand. These wedding sons of bitches make a mint off saps like you, who buy their daughters Beamers and Barbie dolls, then lazy boy along without a clue, until, armed with her best "you don't love me" squalls, she conducts another budget-busting coup. Your little girl, who's always had you by the balls. Another one? The ring? Okay. Ring. The ring. These days, you don't just buy a solitaire. You look for flaws with magnifying loops, check color grades, make setting choices, flared 4-prong cathedral, ridged contour, or flutes of baguette accents down the sides. The bands, once standard 14-karat gold, now come in weapons-grade titanium. It stands to reason one would think as rings become unbreakable, the bonds they represent might too. But every master jeweler knows about the unseen structural punishment gems undergo, the blades, the saws, the blows received on every face, the grinding hours it takes for shapes like teardrops, hearts, and flowers. Any others? Don't be shy. What other sorts of things do they have at weddings? Has anybody ever been to a wedding where you had the dollar dance? What is the dollar dance? Everybody pays $1 to dance with the bride or the groom. And you hope to try to make at least a portion of what you've just spent on this entire fiasco back. So the dollar dance. Once you crashed a former flame's reception and shelled out $50 to his wife's horror to watch him squirm to sticks. For richer or poorer, you rocked that party with your indiscretion and found yourself blacklisted by every bride in town as bitch, slut, thug in 3-inch heels, the stuff of beauty parlor legends. Appeals made by your mother to apologize, Sue Grady's son will never call you now, were met with looks as cold as frozen cake. 5 years and 1 fiancé later, you hope you've been forgiven. Could the crowd allow you one dance for cash to Mr. Biggs' Just Take My Heart? Mom shakes her head and says, elope. How many of you, there are lots of women in the room, how many of you have had to be some kind of maid of honor, bridesmaid, any of that sort of business, over and over and over again? Okay, so we will read the maid of honor. As leader of your best friend's satin posse, your duties include pre-photo makeup checks, guarding the gifts, preventing the triple sec soaked in-laws from doing a risque Bob Fosse number on the tabletops, a job akin to that of foiling evil spirits, like Roman maids first had. Here, evil rears its ugly head in many ways. The poor slob hoarding the hors d'oeuvres, the screaming kids, and even when your friend shows up months later with a suitcase and a boutonniere-sized bruise, the groom. She's stunned, in danger, trapped on the skids, and you're still playing the hero, the mitigator, a shield from trouble she does and does not choose. When I was working on these, I would go to the CVS that was right down the corner from where I was living, and because I wanted to know, like all the vocabulary words and all the newest stuff, so I could try to work it in. And I would buy stacks of wedding magazines, and I wasn't engaged, I wasn't married or anything like that, so I had no ring. And the cashier, I would always go at the same time, and the cashier just, after a while, she was like, "It's okay to be single." And she was really, I think she was really worried after a while. And I was like, no, it's a project. And then I thought, how many women have probably said that? It's a project. But I did, after 19 of them like that, I thought maybe I should try to write a nice one. And I lucked out because my brother decided to get married. And he asked me to say something at the wedding, and I was like, oh, well, I'll write a poem for it. And he had been reading these. My brother's not a poet, he's not a writer, but he will read what I've written and give me feedback on it and say whether he likes it or whether or not it makes absolutely no sense. And so he just kind of looked at me skeptically, like, I don't know if that's a very good idea. But I promised him that it would be a nice poem. So the epigraph is just the beginning of that very famous and perhaps overused Irish blessing, "May the road rise up to meet you." Okay, the toast. If life is a country and love a coast-to-coast road trip, may your marriage be a Subaru, a Bentley, a loaded Winnebago. Screw the price of gas and gun it. Let rip a host of victory burnouts and two-wheel all the curves. Let solitary cyclists quake in their clips. Let tailgaters curse your windows' lipstick quips. Monogamy is sexy. You'll need nerves as steely as a skylar could when hail pummels the windshield or dust storms wipe the road from sight. But stay with the vehicle. In time, you'll own a classic beauty the rest will trail forever, jealous of your view. A rainbowed horizon, clear lanes, and one last hill to climb. In the third section of the book, the poems begin to explore religion a little more pointedly, and also sort of bizarrely at the same time, I start using the trope of a horse. I love horses, and horses, if you don't know, their anatomy has really great names, just great words, like pasture and even like the equipment. You've got like grapples and all kinds of like really wonderful words. And so I wanted to find a way to use the vocabulary as well. So I started using horses as metaphors and things like that. And at the same time, I was sort of feeling a little punchy in my workshops, and so I had this professor who was like, you can't write about abstractions. You can't be very straightforward with abstractions. And I thought, well, screw that. I'm going to write about abstractions. And so I decided to give them a figure. And so I have a series of poems in the third section that are written in the voice of what is probably a horse. And the rider of the horse is an abstraction. So when the rider is hope, when the rider is pride, when the rider is truth, those sorts of things. So I'm going to read two of those, and they're pretty short. When the rider is hope. We pilot evening's cryptic air, fused as faith and plea and prayer. my burdens to become pure flight, his to right me if I scare. When my blind spot blurs the fence, he imparts his confidence, his easy girl, his loose rein hands reprimand my reticence. Heel to rib, approach, then thrust, I'm suspended by his trust. Plain earth's brief renegade, in bascules made of breath and dust. And then this poem is When the Writer is Truth. When the writer is truth, I am froth and lather, sent steaming through jade fields while he sits heavy in the saddle, beating love songs on my flanks I'm slow to learn. His snapped whip rings like church bells. He prays my name. In different winds, it rhymes with win and race. At night, he rests against my neck and tells me stars are born between my heartbeats, though they're unreachable this trip. Still, with him I feel sure-footed, running on this soil of sand, this miraculous green, where every day is like no other in its symmetry of hill and valley. When shadows blend, I want the blinders on. I want the spurs and speed. It's then I understand tight reins, the firm grip, the bitter iron on my tongue, the blood and sharper bit I'm driven with. So the last poem that I'll read from the book is the title poem. And again, I spent a lot of time at revival, so this poem comes from some of those experiences. And I also wanted to write a poem that was in some way for my father. And so this one's for him. After the revival. We gather at the river in our polyester blends. We gather in our sunburnt skins, sore from the day-long sermon, a bright congregation of frailties. To my right, a man cleans his trifocals with his shirt front. To my left, a woman taps her titanium knee, says it'll outlast me. From weed and willow edging the bank, vellum whir of yellow jackets stirs my hand to touch 3 scars from childhood stings along my jaw. 3 scars from the day of my baptism. 3 stings as I stood by the river, my throat swelling and swelling until I dropped to my knees in the clearing, my hair still wet when my father at last laid one hand on my shoulder, prayed, "Spare my daughter," then jammed the EpiPen into my thigh. By which I was saved, the plea or the needle, I can't say. But before breath rattled its wings behind my teeth again, I witnessed the bunch velvet of thunderclouds drag the distant ridgeline like a robe's soiled trim across nails. My own Sinai, my burning bush, I should have prophesied but couldn't, too numb, unsure, and only 12, though the elders stood with their amens poised around me. Since then, my throat's been numbed by different means, horrors of love, horrors of doubt, a sister's child laid to rest in a wet grave, my father's stumbling over stones in the fields he's plowed, 2 black spots blooming in each of his eyes. I've trusted too often the lens doctored in chemical heat, and not the eyes behind my eyes. But this evening, after new humbling and hymns tendered by failed voices, I see that each willow leaf backlit by the apricot sun is actually a candle set aglow and hovering. My father stands there in invisible water, blessing the baptized, his hands reading their faces, and the air around him is quick with thousands of wings. O death, so proud in your jacket of cheeriest yellow, this world is a dark cloak I tire of wearing. Take my eyes and hands, take my throat and the songs it traps, and I will still remember those promises made in the shapes of rivers. I am waiting for you here on bended knees. Do not hide from me now. Excuse me. So after the book was finished and it came out, I had about a year and a half where I didn't really write anything, and it was terrifying. I tried to write some things and I didn't like them, and I was very worried about writing too much exactly like I was writing before. I wanted to write something different, but I just wasn't sure how. And so I got in a really bad mood for a long time about it, and I began to kind of not really become a hermit, but I sort of sequestered myself from the rest of the world for a while. And I'm also kind of one of those people who will sort of do like minor experiments on myself. So what would happen if you just ate Wheaties every meal for an entire week? Like, what would happen to you? So I would do some things sort of like that. So for a while I decided, well, the book was really focused on music, and I listen to music all the time, and it's sort of like a kind of sustenance for me, as it is for a lot of people. And so I decided, what would happen if I just stopped listening to music? And the only time I ever heard it for about 8 months was when I went to the grocery store, or when I went to a store, somewhere where they had it playing, or in a movie. But I stopped buying CDs. I didn't listen to anything on iTunes. I never turned on the radio. And what happens is you start to go crazy. That's what happens. But I did get a good poem out of it. So finally I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. I think I'm done with this. I'm ready to be a part of the world again. And I'm ready to see what new bands. And of course now I'm in this 6-month period where I just can't listen to enough music. But I did begin to get some poems out of it. And I also noticed that what happened was that my poems began to change. My poems began to sort of strip themselves down. So there weren't as many, I guess, sonic fireworks in them, and which is okay. I kind of like it. So now I have these poems that are a little skinnier maybe than my other poems were. So this is the first poem that I wrote and it's also the first poem where I thought, okay, all right, now I remember how to do this. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to be okay. So I guess one of the lessons there is, 1, don't go 8 months without listening to music if you don't want to. And 2, if you go through a drought of some kind of art, it'll come back. So don't worry too much. All right, so a year without music. All you have to lose is one beloved note, and how swiftly your symphony unravels. The ear becomes a fist. Ravens appear in the skeletal trees, flapping their great undecipherable wings. You think you hear wind, but hear lightning, hear snow. Even the night has no pitch. Whoever would have thought the clouds could muzzle both earth and sky concurrently has thought it and gone home. Shut his door, shut his mouth, shut your mouth. The way you lie on the floor as your neighbor climbs each crooked stair. The way you strain those creaks for a chord. When you dream, it is in still lifes. When you swim, it is through soundless waters. When you run, it is down the center line of a highway so silent it takes lives. One of them was mine. Today in the class we were talking about Ars Poeticas, poems about poetry, and I've only written a couple of those, but I like them, and I admire poets who can write them, and I like to write in the voices of things. And so I decided I would try to write a poem in the voice of poetry. And what would poetry have to say to me, to us, were she, he able to talk? So this is simply titled Poetry. My father was a bottle of ink, skimmed from a crude oil slick and thinned with a jigger of gin. My mother a stone for a wedding. Born of such brutal instruments, what else could I be but wanting? What else could I do but claim each tombstone wreath as my own? Some call me crinoline, snowpack, pretty as a robin's pale egg. But there's more of me in the wrestle to air than the fledgling's first song. Like a ruby, I am wrenched from bedrock, struck with chisels. The greater my impurity, the deeper my color will flare. And you, simple prey of my affections, be not so bewildered those mornings you find your name traced in the nightstand's dust. I'm only trying to make you look harder. I've nursed you through your thickest of fevers, pressing the cloth to your wet neck, stroking your hands as you kick at your visions. Do you not see the rug's twin hollows left by my kneeling? Quietly, I lace together my long fingers. The world grows ever darker out the window. I fear someday everything will be afraid of me. The one thing that I could not give up was horses. I told myself I was not allowed to write any poems about horses. That lasted about 4 days. So I went back to horses, and it's also very hard not to write about horses when you live in Kentucky, and there's like a whole culture of that here. So I decided to write a poem in the voice of Barbaro. Do you know who Barbaro is? Okay, so Barbaro won the Kentucky Derby, and they thought he would be the Triple Crown winner. And then he went on to race at the Preakness, and right out of the gate, he stumbled and he broke one of his legs. And they thought they would be able to mend him, and they were not. And it was this ongoing saga, and like school children everywhere were writing him letters to get well, and then whatever the problem was, it began to move to his other legs. And so for a while, he was in this sling that sort of kept him off the ground completely. And then they knew that just wasn't going to work. And finally, he was euthanized. And so I'm beginning a series of poems that sort of explore this relationship that we have with animals, where we love them, but we sort of make them do what we want. And so in the poem, Barbaro speaks to his trainer. So the title of the poem is Before Being Euthanized, Barbaro Speaks to His Trainer. I did not need to feel the whip, for I knew you'd made me to rule the world I moved through. So I moved through others like me, like they were air. Blinder, bit, and hair, each image grew, then fell to sweat and breath, a mouth of iron, hooves on dirt, and a roar so long and loud I couldn't bear it. Then a slip, a skittery start, a snap, my pastern bone, a constellation, a knife, a hoof half missing when I woke, and you, heavy with sorrow. Brief green, white sky, a mass, 4 points of pain, a sling to keep me hovering, and you, so low, knowing no longer would the rhythm of my thunder be the measure of our worth. Did I always look safe enough to love? Like a horse, you have always shied from the dead. Like the dead, I am about to run far beyond the dark prairie. Which one of us is least afraid now? In the class, we were talking about a form called the guzzle, which is an unfortunate sounding name. But I like to write in forms, and I've never written a guzzle before, so I've been trying to write a few of them. And the way they work is they're in couplets, and you're supposed to have a repeating phrase or word at the end of the second line, and it's supposed to come back at each stanza. And then in the end, you're supposed to work in your own name. And so I decided I wanted to do that, and I wanted to somehow make my name also the repeating line. But then I fudged it a little bit, so I began to use variations of my name. And I felt like maybe that was too much cheating. So I decided for the first line to make it my sister's name, and to have variations of that. Her name is Brooke. And so the poem became a poem for her, but it used both of our names and variations of our names at the ends of the stanzas. So the poem is just titled Love Poem for My Sister. I'm stuck, you say, meaning the stars won't brook your all-night arguments, your pleas for one less day spent carrying your worries like bricks in the grocery sack of your heart. I broke our mother's water first and wish this meant my words carried more than a gas bag's nasalized tune. A fat wheeze plays at breakneck speed on a station fuzzed by static. Wish it meant my own carrion comfort could count for yours. It doesn't. Despair is a back alley broker with a slow chokehold, and every deal he makes is raw. Careless in love, I've unbuttoned in many a matinee for him, unzipped in brackish winds, been turned by the blade of his shadow into the bloodiest carnage. You are a better woman, yet he haunts the break at your soul's cliff edge all the same. Though I care too little for pretense to pretend my arms are anything but broken, I excel at bootstrap resurrections in the sturdy duty of my name. So in the small stream of your own floods to menacing swells, Brooke, my best sister, through that cold and rising water, I will carry you. And the last poem that I'm going to read is a poem that has two sorts of things that started it. One is that I was in a workshop over the summer, and we made a list of words that we have been told do not belong in poems. And one of those words was rainbow. And so I decided somehow I wanted to use the word rainbow in the poem, or I don't know, somehow as a metaphor or something. And the other thing that we were instructed to do was to think about a word that seems insignificant, but that means a lot to us in one way or another. And I've thought of the word maybe, and how so often we might even hinge entire life decisions on a maybe, whether or not this thing will or will not work out. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Maybe I'll have better luck if I move to California, so I moved to California. Maybe he loves me, so I'll stick around. So it seems to be a really loaded term that we use all of the time. And then, so I decided to use that in the poem. And I decided to make the title of the poem Rainbow, because rainbows do have a connotation of there's some sort of hope at the end. And I think when we use the word maybe, we're always, of course, hoping for the good part of that maybe to happen. So this is Rainbow, and thanks again very much for coming out this afternoon. Rainbow. Maybe we're never asked for a safe word. Maybe we ask God to strike us. Maybe the scenes we want to enact are scenes we've already lived. After you left each Sunday night, I prepared the first meal we had shared. I set your place at the table. I poured the wine in your glass. The meal did not bring you back. And yet each week, wine in your glass, cinnamon on the tongue, my grief rising like heat from the dish. Maybe is not a safe word. I longed for you as I longed for God to strike you. He refused. He gagged me, bound my hands. There in the darkness, he wrote on my body an alphabet of mercy. The words you used were guns cocked in my mouth, all of the safeties off, and I was the creature you loved to make mute. Maybe there are no safe words. Maybe I can only open wider. Now, when you visit my dreams and ask if it's safe to enter, I do not raise the whip of my anger. I speak to you in tongues, in grace. I speak to you as a stranger. Your face I am beginning not to remember. This meal I will prepare for another. Thank you.